Hello! I hope everyone's doing okay. I am going to go for a little walk again and do another little video. And it's so nice outside. I was sitting inside, I just got home a little while ago from the office, and I was like, you know, it's cool, but it's nice, and I don't have any excuse not to, so I'll go for a little walk by myself. It's the season is really changing here now in Ontario, and you can feel the chill in the air. All of the leaves are pretty much done. You can see pretty much all done now. It always happens, it's very strange, it always happens when you least expect it, because, you know, last year it seemed like it dragged on and on and on. It seemed like fall and autumn just dragged on and on. Like it started early and it went well into November. And now most of the trees are finished. Most of the red is done. And I'm not even really disappointed. It didn't feel connected this year. I don't know, I didn't feel connected with autumn this year. Normally it's a big thing for me. I love autumn. I love the changing of the leaves. But this year it just kind of came and went, and it wasn't a big show. Some of the trees felt like they were really unaware of what their neighbors were doing. So you had little batches, so each species was starting to change, and then another species would change, and then another species would change, and then suddenly, you know, a few weeks ago it seemed like a lot were red, and then just disappeared, and now it's like this. So that is what it is. It is what it is, as they say. So I was thinking about what I could talk about in this little video, and I've been receiving messages from people, you know, you wrote a book on ancestor veneration. Why haven't you made any content about ancestor veneration? It's Samhain, it's Halloween, it's All Hallows, it's Day of the Dead. And I was very intentional in not doing that. And I thought I would do this now, particularly because it's like what, the 3rd or the 2nd of November. I thought that now would be a good time. So for those of you who don't know, if you're just coming to my channel and just finding this, I wrote a book on ancestor veneration, and it is called Ancestral Veneration, Ancestral Whispers, I should say, a guide to developing ancestral veneration practices. And it came out through Llewellyn last year. And it is a guidebook to developing an authentic ancestral veneration practice. And it's coming from a place of connecting in with your own ancestor, with your own ancestors, your own ancestral traditions, but also expanding the concept of what an ancestor is. You know, it's this idea that we so often in the West assume the ancestors are just one type of ancestor, that they're dead, that they're biologically connected to us, and that's it. We have some vague idea of ancestors being lineage ancestors, but there are so many other types of ancestors. And so I really wanted to encourage readers to expand that for themselves, to think about, you know, different types of ancestors, and then to expand their practice to be inclusive of those other ancestors. So the guidebook is really about relationship, and that's a word I use again and again throughout the book. But then when we start to look at the relationship, we start to look at what types of relationship. And this is a big one for me. In the traditions that I've been very lucky and fortunate to be connected with, ancestor work doesn't come around just once a year. It isn't like the Western kind of Catholic approach, which is that the Day of the Dead happens once a year. It's a big feast in the calendar. Ancestor work is every day. Ancestor work is in the home. Ancestor work is multifaceted. And in some of the traditions, so a little background, I was connected with Lukumi, which also goes by the name Santeria, or more properly, Regla de Ocha. It is a Cuban form of Orisha tradition, which is West African Yoruba tradition. And the Egun, the ancestors in that tradition, are a vital part of the tradition. They are always there. They are foundational. Before any event, you recite, or if you're initiated fully, you recite your Moyuba, which is the call to your ancestors, to your lineage ancestors, and then to the Orishas and to God Almighty. And so you have your shrine, whether it be your Egun shrine or in some houses your Bovada, which is the other tradition I've been associated with, connected to that tradition, is Spiritismo. And they're there all the time. They are actively part of the household. Whenever you cook something, you put a little bit of the food down for them. You offer them fresh water. You offer them a lighted candle. You do all of these things every single day, or on a frequent basis, because they were, when they were living every single day, right? So, although Cuba is a heavily Catholic country, these traditions continued in their original form, which is that continual relationship. And that was something that I found was very lacking in neo-paganism. You know, a lot of people in neo-paganism want to connect with their ancestors, but they're not sure how. Or they're not sure they're willing to, because those ancestors were Christian in life and they don't feel as connected to them. They're ancient pagan ancestors that they really want to work with, and I'm generalizing here, but this is something that I've seen in my research. The ancient pagan ancestors are so remote that many of those lived traditional practices have, what's the word? They've become extinct, right? The living thread to them has disappeared, has died, has atrophied. And so in trying to create new relationships with those ancient ancestors, a lot of neo-pagans don't know how to do that. They're creating their own traditions actively through inspiration on those scraps of pieces of information that they used to have. Or, and this is the more dangerous piece, they're culturally appropriating other people's traditions to augment what they have. And so my book was really about encouraging people to take a syncretic, relational approach to ancestor work, to engage with their ancestors and the traditions that those ancestors practiced, even if they aren't necessarily ones you believe in yourself. So for me, when I work with my biological ancestors, I work with British culture. I work with the culture that I'm connected to, that they're also connected to as well. And it is inspired by, influenced by Lukumi and Espiritismo, but it isn't a carbon copy. And that also, I was part of those traditions, even as a non-initiate. For so long, I was connected to those traditions, and I am still connected to those traditions. I still have a huge love of the Orisha, and my spirit guides I still work with in the Espiritismo form. But for those people who don't have that, that's why I wrote the book. It's not prescriptive. I'm not telling people what to do in the book, but I am trying to show examples and to talk about really get down to the baseline, right? And the foundations. So I've noticed that one of the big hang-ups is ancestral work is relegated only to Samhain, is only relegated to this time of year. And I think in some cultural contexts that might be true, but when you look around the world, and the majority of human civilizations, both ancestral to a lot of North Americans and also living right now, the ancestors are worked with every day. So I intentionally didn't post a lot of stuff about Samhain and working with the ancestors at this time of year, because I don't necessarily think that it is as healthy. And that's certainly not to, that was an eagle that just went by. That's certainly not to dump on neo-pagan practice. But I think that what I have seen is that oftentimes the ancestors can be neglected because of that. The ancestors are seen as being only around this time of year, and then they're forgotten the rest of the year. Or people don't know what to do with them the rest of the year. I was recently approached by Llewellyn to contribute to their one of their upcoming Sabbaths almanacs. And I chose a Sabbath that I don't particularly work with myself, but I really sat with that and I thought, okay, I want to do something ancestral because it's my work. How does this Sabbath, and they were okay with it. Llewellyn was absolutely fine with it, and the editor wrote back and said she loves what I wrote up. But I sat with it and I thought, okay, this Sabbath, how can I include death in this Sabbath? And it's a harvest festival. It's one of the harvest festival Sabbaths. And it really struck me that one of the hang-ups I've noticed is that Westerners in general, neo-pagans and non-neo-pagans alike, have this hang-up about death where they see death as a final, as a finale, as not cyclical as you would expect for some of these traditions. They see it in the way that a lot of Protestants see it, which is completely the end. There is this vague sense of an afterlife, but that the dead and the living cannot, will not, do not connect with each other. And because of that, like that's a very kind of Western secular approach to it too, right? Because of that, there's this sense of the death in its place, or death in its place. So when I was looking at this harvest Sabbath, I was like, okay, I have this sense of what I can do. So I wrote a really cool ritual. I talked about kind of the interplay between the harvest and the dance macabre, the dance of death, which is a medieval folktale. And the medieval folktale goes that 3 hunters, young men, were in the woods one day hunting. And they came across 3 dead men. And the 3 dead men said to them, "Just as you are, so were we. Just as we are, so shall you be." And it was that reminder that death is inevitable. Death is as natural a part of life as birth is. And we all will experience it. No matter who we are, no matter what we do in life, we all will die. Every single human will die eventually. I know that Jeff Bezos and other assholes like that generally don't think that, but it's true. Every single person will die. So because it is so enraptured into our culture, and I would say all religions deal with that question of death, the idea then is, how can you find death in life, right? How can you find death and end in life, which is a beginning? And that's really because death is a new beginning, right? 9 is death, 10 is zero, a new beginning. And for me, I mean, from a religious standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, I do believe in reincarnation, but I do believe in reincarnation in different levels. So when I think of my ancestors, they began a death state when they died, but it wasn't a fresh start. They still had connections to us. In the same way that when we graduate from school or college or university, we start a new life. We can't go back. I mean, we can go back. You can definitely go back for more degrees, but we start new phases of our life. So I tend to see death as a new phase. And because I see that, I can't see it relegated just one time of year. You know, the world around us right now, like all of this here, right? All of this here is death, right? But these leaves are not necessarily the same as the trees. The trees aren't, well, some of them are dead, but the trees are not dead. They're just going into a different phase. The leaves are just the cast-offs, right? And yet, they still have relationship. We still have relationship to the trees as we're walking through this. So I want to challenge this idea and really encourage people to think about death as just another life transition, right? Obviously, I've never experienced death in this life. I do believe that I have experienced death in previous lives. And I do believe that, you know, in my next life, part of me will go on, part of me will be in another place, part of me will end just like these trees casting off their leaves. Aspects of me will drop off and become kind of nutrients to the next generation, nutrients to the cycle. And so for me, ancestor veneration really is about that relationship piece, about life, about becoming something new and becoming something different. And in that becoming something new, death then is not a finale. And so when I honor my ancestors, I honor them and I communicate with them and I relate to them as people who are just in a different phase of their life. And I work with them in that way. How can I make my life now the best that it can be? How can I be the healthiest person now so that when I get to where they're at, I can be the healthiest when I'm there? And then how can I then help my descendants, whoever they happen to be? I'm probably not going to have biological children. So how can I make my communities better? How can I add to the collective unfolding, right? That's really what ancestor veneration is for me. You know, it's not so much the rituals, it's not so much the prayers, it's not so much even the beliefs, it's the worldview. And so, you know, the rituals and the prayers and the lighting of candles and the honoring and the blah, 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 right? They're just a different way of having communication. They're just different ways of having a phone call with, you know, grandma or with great uncle or with first grandfather from, you know, thousands of years ago. So this is why I don't generally say a lot during this time of year on ancestor veneration. Even though I know that my book is being sold, I can see the sales figures, I can see that people are buying it in order to answer these questions for themselves, because essentially it just comes down to that for me. It's that sense of, I want to encourage people to take hold of this for themselves, not to be told what to do when it comes to ancestor work, but to embrace it for themselves, to work relationally with their ancestors. In the same way that I think, and this is personal gnosis here, I think that there are rituals in death that the dead do to communicate with the living. I think that there are rituals that the dead do to communicate with the newly born. I think that there are so many ties between different forms of life and different intelligences and different states of being, different levels of reality. In this reality, magic and religious tradition and ritual is a form of tradition and a form of communication. And the tradition is the culture of those traditions. The tradition is the culture of those rituals because they work. But sometimes culture has to change, right? So yes, 20 minutes of me rambling about ancestor veneration. I want to, again, encourage people to take responsibility of their practices. I want people to engage with their practices, regardless of who you're communicating with, whether it be gods, whether it be spirits, whether it be the dead, right? Each other, animals, the sky. So there's a lot to it. There's a lot to it. Anyways, I'm coming to the end of my walk here. I hope everyone is having a wonderful November, start to their November. I want to say, any of those who are watching, I want to express joy to you. And I hope that whatever holiday that you've been practicing over the past couple of weeks, because we've had quite a few of them, were joyful, and I hope that everyone has a good rest of the day. See you, folks.